What have you had, or what kinds of experiences have you had that have been sort of light bulb moments or times when you have felt truth was revealed to you or something from the divine was revealed to you? Like, what are some of your stories around that?
Well, we talked the other day, and I was telling you about this kind of body work session that I had received a few years ago. And I'm not sure how it fully worked, but I remember lying on the floor. It was in the big conference room at this hotel. There's all these other people around me kind of getting the same body work. And I had sort of been carried off the table, laid on the ground, and I could still feel this kind of undulation moving through my body as if I were being kind of rocked from within. And you might think, well, that's, what's so special about that? At the time, there was this deep sense of well-being, a deep sense that life was okay. I even came to this recognition that if I were to die right now, that I had walked a pretty awesome life up until that moment, and that I'd kind of done the best that I could. And there was a feeling of gratitude that I was privileged to be able to experience that special moment. It was just from a body work. It's translating the mystical experience to another person very often sort of falls flat. Mm-hmm. At its worst, it sounds a little cuckoo. But I felt in that moment this kind of deep sense of what we might call grace, that everything up until that moment was unfolding perfectly, that my life had aligned perfectly to bring me into that moment. And I could, at least for the time being, kind of soak up that unique wisdom that was available then. The very next day, I had to go back to work, and I was, at the time, delivering dry cleaning. I was kind of thrust back into this world of people complaining about lost garments, and my buttons are cracked, and I don't like how the creases are in my pants. And so you recognize that the culture doesn't necessarily sustain kind of walking around in an awakened state. You have a job, you have obligations, and sooner or later, you'll start to feel some of the pressure of that. And you recognize that though it was really awesome to experience a moment of what we might call ascension or divine communion, that moment has left a mark on you. And even though you had to leave that moment behind, it's imprinted in you in a way that you know it. The great thing about wisdom, unlike factual information, wisdom's never lost. It almost becomes integrated at a cellular level.
Right.
So the more moments of awakening or deep presence that one has, it's taking a little pipette and adding a few more drops to the bucket of your own awakening. And over time, you find this bucket's almost overflowing. Or somebody once, one of my teachers said, it's like standing on a sheet of rice paper. And the more you let yourself stand on these sheets of rice paper, over time you find that you're standing on a mountain that started off as just a thin little sheet of paper. Now you can have experiences where you start to, as in the words of my teacher, take whole crates of rice paper and shove them under your feet, or hold truckloads of rice paper. These experiences might be really enjoyable. Sometimes they might be very intense. Sitting in the fire of an intense experience without recoiling, those are the truckloads of rice paper where we know that we don't like it, but we find a kind of acceptance around it.
Well, that's such a beautiful lesson or a way to look at the difficult situations in life. And, of so many things that people might be facing with themselves or with loved ones, that when you come upon this very hard road for however long it lasts, to be able to look at it like that, like you're sort of burning through it and gathering the rice paper. I mean, that must be very helpful, I think, for people to hear, to know that while they're in this situation, there's actually something on the other side, fruit on the other side from this.
Indeed.
But how do you suggest that people get through those difficult scenarios?
Yoga's a great way. Meditation's a great way. Shinzen Young says that meditation is taking a moment where you sit down, you practice a kind of refinement of presence or noticing, just observing. And this is, if you will, kind of practicing scales. Life is the concerto. That's where you will have any number of moments that will initiate you into some difficult stuff. And in those moments, you could go back to maybe your old way of just responding, lashing out, positing blame, self-medicating, or you could, even if ultimately you end up doing some of that for a little bit, in watching the process of how one tries to regain power if you feel like you've lost it, you get a sense of how you might be still a little bit beholden to your own habits and conditioning, or a little bit beholden to your belief that you are your experiences. You are the sum total of your experiences. So yoga and meditation are great ways of practicing this. I think having a sitting practice, even if it's just 5-10 minutes in the morning, to sit down and just kind of observe what your mind is drawn to, you start to develop strategies for handling intense experiences. You can think of the image of a self as kind of the confluence of thought and feeling. And when you are thrown into an intense emotional experience, usually what happens is your thoughts are intertangling with feeling, creating this sort of mishmash of crossing points. And every time thought kind of crosses emotion or physical sensation in the body, you will probably have a point of suffering there, unless it's like a joyful experience. But most of the time we're talking about anger or sadness or grief or shame or embarrassment. But if you take a moment when you're experiencing an unpleasant emotion, to first just let the story play out in the background without trying to figure it out, but just focus on what you're feeling, that pit in your gut, maybe flushness in the face, or how your shoulders may have hunched up. When you pause to just kind of notice the somatic response or the somatic component to an emotion, you find that it's not as bad as maybe you initially perceived it to be. I tried this one. I've tried this several times, or I don't say tried it. I just sat down and did it. When I'm dealing with something unpleasant, I go, well, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? And very often you'll feel that there's a kind of dynamic movement of energy in the body that, beyond the story, can be very pleasant. The feeling of grief or sadness in the body can be a very life-affirming experience. How does one get there? Well, you have to kind of do the work to separate these two components of experience, thought from emotion. The doorway to knowing that one could conceivably do this, sometimes one needs to be informed. One needs to have a teacher or somebody who models it already and can maybe articulate that there's a different way other than simply getting bogged down in that tangle of thought and feeling. But as soon as you start to pull those threads apart, you realize that all of experience is essentially a kind of wave moving through us, that nothing is going to be permanent. And when you recognize that, then intense experiences no longer have the grip or the kind of punishing effect that they might have had in the past.
Beautifully said. So it does occur to me that we don't know nearly enough about our bodies. And because you're talking about, your experience where some wisdom was revealed to you or truth, I feel like that was in a state when your body was in a very relaxed state. Yeah. And I do find that, and I'm not going to be able to articulate this very well, but there's sort of a default place that we can get when we're not in the fear, or flight position where we're completely relaxed, and our body can go into there's sort of a default place or sort of a zero balance where I think we are completely connected to our spiritual self, to our divine self, and that informs us from that level.
Right.
And if we can, the more we can get back to that, and so even when you're talking about meditating or just sitting, I think daily, and especially during troubles, if you can get yourself kind of more into that default place, then our bodies can also help take care of us. The body can actually affect our thinking. We could become calmer, and everything becomes calmer. And I think that this integration that you're talking about can happen. But I feel like that's not been. I suppose in yoga we're looking into that, but I really think our body is already a divine instrument, and we just really haven't learned to rely on it and use it in the way that could be most useful for us going forward.
You're right. And I don't know if it's just a uniquely Western experience. I'm sure there are areas of the world where whole swaths of the population have that kind of internal reference. When the white man showed up in Hawaii, a couple hundred years ago or whenever we first landed there, the natives there called the white man Howleys. And Howley to them meant one who does not move and one who does not breathe. Now, obviously, these are white men who move and they do breathe, but it's at such a kind of disconnected state that these people around the island, very tapped into the rhythms of nature, were aware that there seemed to be something almost dead to these visitors. And that's I'm told that's what the original name Howley meant. So in the West, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you could posit blame and say that some of it might come from the sort of repressive nature of the Catholic Church as it started to show up around, the year 400, I guess, when Constantine, kind of made the leap that the Western world was now going to kind of follow this. Sexual energy and sexual expressiveness got kind of pushed down. I'm not sure where we sort of lost the tie to nature. We could probably, ascribe any number of causes for where we lost it. Thank God we're starting to tap in a little bit more to some of these ancient traditions and wisdoms that bring us back to a sense of listening and breathing and being in relationship to the world rather than merely trying to conquer it and be masters of the world. So we're not fully there. But there are little, kind of pockets here in the West that are starting to spring up of people doing yoga or people working in the realm of sustainable living, people making their own communal houses and regions where there's a little bit more of that sense of interconnection and obligation to the fellow man. Unfortunately, we've had distortions around this that we might call, communism, where
Right.
the desires of the individual get so pushed down for the interest of the collective that things like the right to pursue one's own happiness is kind of a casualty of that. So I think we're working to find a more sort of socialized way of being that lets people sort of pursue life at their own level while still maintaining a sense of being connected to something larger.